We've talked about many different aspects of death and dying over the course of this semester. We've talked about everything from grief theories to differences between how children and adults mourn the loss of someone they love. We've talked about differences between chronic illness and suicide or violent death, as well as specific signs and symptoms that one is approaching death, all the way to generalizations regarding funerals and burials, entombment, or cremation. In this week's first lecture, we looked at how culture and religion influence death rituals across time. Now, in this next part of lecture, I want to take a step back and look at end-of-life care from a more culturally competent perspective. Not all of your patients will want the same things, whether it be related to treatment, how they die, or what happens after they die. In fact, much as we looked at in our first lecture for this week, we see that culture and religion influence not only death rituals themselves, but also the decisions that people make, whether it's patients or families, when it comes to end-of-life care in general. So we have the same type of flow chart, and just as much as culture, religion, and historical time period influence death rituals, they also influence the decisions that are made regarding preparation for and end of life. So what we're really thinking about is what's socially acceptable within someone's family or religious group. What's seen as socially acceptable within their culture or their larger society? Are some things options for certain people but not others? Absolutely. Our worldview is impacted by all aspects of our life experience, and thus, so are our decisions regarding life and death. But how do we know what these factors are? How do we know what our patients or their families want? How do we learn some basic information as generalizations and then take it that next step to really personalize their care based upon patient and family wishes? In order to investigate this further, I'd like us to revisit the Purnell model, which is used predominantly in Core 1, but also other classes here at the college as well. One could easily justify that all 12 domains relate to end-of-life care, and they certainly do. But I'd like you to focus on these 6. Healthcare practices, healthcare providers, family roles and organization, spirituality, overview and heritage, and death rituals. If we take the time to understand general beliefs and practices for the patient's ethnic or cultural group, that puts us at a really good starting point. We can then use questions and assessment tools to find out more specific information about what's most important to our patient or their family. Sounds easy, right? I mean, it sounds simple enough. But if we think about all the everyday types of miscommunications and misunderstandings that occur in a healthcare environment anyway, and then we focus our thoughts on end-of-life care specifically, we begin to realize that it's not as simple as it looks. Some healthcare providers have a hard enough time dealing with their patients dying as it is, even when those patients have very similar views, beliefs, or wishes as they might have. But when their patients have very different beliefs, treatment preferences, and perspectives, this can make providing care that much more difficult. It makes sense, right? On one hand, we might not even know what our patient or their family wants, and even if they tell us, we may not understand it, support it, or know how to make that happen. But it's very important that we try. Being culturally competent in this sense means that we're aware that differences exist, and we know how to access information or resources to help us provide care that is appropriate for our patients within the context of their own life experiences. We don't want to have a cookie cutter or one-size-fits-all approach to the healthcare we provide, nor do we want to be stereotyping or judging our patients. Instead, we need to recognize what differences exist and then acknowledge the value in those differences. They don't have to be bad. On the contrary, really, these differences and subtle nuances are what enable us to provide truly patient-centered and family-centered care. There are many different things we want to consider. including the fact that American core values emphasize autonomy and individual decision-making, especially when it comes to healthcare. However, that doesn't work for everyone in the world, or not even for everyone in America for that matter. And it shouldn't have to. Our job is not to tell our patients and their families what to do, or to kind of push them into a corner where they feel pressure to make a decision that doesn't fit with their mindset, but rather we're to be there to listen to them and help them achieve the outcomes that they desire, whatever that may be, and whatever treatment methods they wish to integrate. Americans' focus on autonomy, full disclosure, and control may not be as important or even socially condoned in other cultures. These values may often be in conflict with the values of many ethnic and culturally diverse groups in the U.S. These conflicts can then lead to health disparities that result in things like fragmented care, inadequate or inappropriate symptom management, miscommunication, and even a difficult and poor death for the patient. Instead, if the healthcare providers can understand and recognize the unique and specific influences that culture has on the patient's behavior, attitudes, preferences, and decisions regarding end-of-life care, then we are much better prepared to provide care that is congruent with our patients' and families' wishes. At the same time, we have to remember that not everyone in that specific cultural group or population has the exact same wishes and preferences. People may have their own unique viewpoints and wishes, so we always need to ask. Look at your own life, for example. Say that you identify as a Caucasian Lutheran or Catholic. Does that mean that you have the exact same beliefs and wishes as every other person who also identifies as a member of that ethnic or faith group? Of course not. When you could even look at your own family, and chances are pretty good that there will be some variations between you and your parents or your siblings, certainly maybe your grandparents. None of us like to be judged or labeled, so we don't want to do that to our patients. Remember how in Core 1 we talked about using generalizations as a starting point or a springboard? We talked about how stereotypes are ending points, but generalizations give us a place to start, and then we can ask questions as part of our assessment in order to learn more. Then we take that information we gather and we use it to collaborate with our patients and come up with a care plan that will work for them and that's mindful of their own beliefs and preferences. That's what we want to be doing here. We say that we only live once and that yet that lifetime is full of all kinds of experiences. We also only die once, and we want to do anything we can to help our patients' death be how they want it to be. At the same time, we need to remember something else we've been talking about all semester in this class, and that is that end-of-life care means more than just treating physical symptoms. We've talked a lot about psychological, social, and spiritual needs and tasks as well. It can be easy to just focus on the physical symptoms, especially when our patients are of a different background than us, and we may feel overwhelmed or even awkward asking them about specific beliefs or cultural practices. But that's when it's most important. If we don't ask them, we don't know, and we may well be overlooking something that quite simply could make a huge difference for them in their dying experience. Finally, research shows, and this should be no surprise, that communication is the biggest barrier between the patient and family and the healthcare team. Communication involves verbal and written forms of communication, so we might be needing an interpreter or a translator at times, but we can't forget that nonverbal communication comprises 70% of the message we convey. Therefore, all those other aspects of communication, such as eye contact, proximity or spacing, gestures, volume and tone, all those things make a big difference when trying to effectively communicate with our patients. In looking at various aspects of end-of-life care, it becomes evident there are specific areas we need to take into consideration as healthcare professionals. These are things that, again, sound simple enough, and yet we often overlook them, and we don't even realize it. We may find ourselves becoming frustrated with our patients or their families, or just not seeming to understand their preferences. We find ourselves unable to connect with them on that different level. Instead of assuming it's something that's the fault of our patients or their family, we often just need to step back and consider what might be right in front of us. In the remaining part of lecture, I'd like to look briefly at each of these cultural factors so that they're brought to the forefront of our minds, and then, hopefully, can be easily and quickly recalled when you might need that information again in the future. As noted in this week's reading, in some cultures, talking openly about death and dying is not acceptable because it's considered disrespectful, bringing bad luck, causing the loss of hope, or might even be felt to bring upon death faster. In fact, many cultures actively protect dying family members from knowing their prognosis. This is very different than much of the dominant culture in the U.S., and thus healthcare providers often feel the urge to tell the patient anyway, or to bring it up even if the family doesn't want it mentioned. It's in these types of moments that we need to stop and remind ourselves, this is not about us and our comfort level, or what makes us comfortable, or what we might like to know if this was us in that position, but rather this is about our patients and their family and doing what's best for them within their own cultural beliefs and standards. Telling them anyway, even though we know they don't want to know, is not only selfish and unprofessional, but it could be seen as unethical. Not everyone is focused on control and autonomy and having all the information like we tend to be. Remember when we talked about high and low context in previous classes, such as Core 1? And I know I keep referring to that, but much of this carries over, and for many of you, especially nursing students, you should be seeing these connections in all of your classes. And for all of you, regardless of your discipline, these are things we need to consider when we're working with patients at the end of life. We remember that many Americans want all the details and the information, but not all ethnic or cultural groups are the same way. If the patient or family tells us they want to do things differently or not have that bad news disclosed, then we need to respect that. The reading for today provides some great examples, and I'll share a few right now. For example, that she talked about how some Filipinos may request that the person not be told they're dying because of concern for the person's loss of hope and the belief that only God can decide a person's fate. In another example, for many Southeast Asian families, the dying family member is not told because talking about death would bring it on sooner or may be seen as disrespectful to the soon-to-be ancestor. Finally, some Somalis may consider it uncaring for the healthcare provider to tell someone they're dying. And for some Muslims, the religious leader may need to facilitate the conversation with the male family leader and the healthcare provider about these end-of-life issues and concerns. Collective decision-making is the norm in many cultures, but it often clashes with the American values of autonomy and an individual's right to make one's own choices. Instead of being focused just on the patient having a say, many families need to talk and come to a decision together. This might be true even for many of you. You may want the ultimate say in your care, but you often consult family, such as parents or a spouse or siblings, before making really critical decisions. The only difference here is that for many people, they don't feel the need to make that choice on their own, or even be the one who has to speak up and say what they'll do. Instead, many cultures, even within the U.S. as well as around the world, have the family involved in the very beginning, and then it may be a specific person in that family who speaks up and talks with the healthcare providers about what is going to happen. It may be the father, the husband, the grandmother. It all depends on the cultural expectations and family dynamics. The point is, though, that we need to be open to that. We can't assume that if our patient doesn't speak up or voice choices for themselves, that they're being oppressed, abused, or controlled. If their norm is to have someone else speak up about big decisions, chances are that's how it's always been in their family, and they're okay with that. We don't have to always assume the worst. Instead, find out who you need to talk to and go from there. If the family needs information before the patient gets it, you can do that. If the patient wants to be informed at the same time as the family, that's okay too. Let your patient be the guide and then direct your communication toward the appropriate person or people. Again, I thought our reading for this week offered some more good examples to help illustrate this point. For one, Koreans and Mexicans are more likely to consider family as the decision maker regarding withholding aggressive treatment rather than that falling to the patient alone. Also, for many Asians and Pacific Islanders, filial piety, which means having respect for one's father, elders, or ancestors, requires that family members take over the decision-making role for an elderly person who is seriously ill. In Filipino and Hawaiian communities, more specifically, extended family is involved in discussions and decision-making. For many, a male will be the spokesperson for the family, and the father may be the one who bears bad news to the patient. In Asian Indian families, when death is imminent, the father has to decide when the patient might be told and when to inform the rest of the family members. How patients and families view the healthcare provider may also depend upon the physician's status and experience in their own country, which may then carry over to how they view physicians in the U.S. If someone comes from a country or region where the physician or healer made all the healthcare decisions, they may be unaccustomed to being asked questions or asked to choose specific treatment options. Instead, the patient and family may be expecting that the physician will make those determinations as part of his or her assigned role. In many cultures, it can be seen as rude or offensive to question the physician, so patients may just go along with whatever the physician says. Even if they don't understand or do not agree, some patients and families won't say anything. On the flip side, if someone isn't used to even working with doctors and nurses in the first place, there may also be some apprehension or anxiety about this new environment and the uncertainty that awaits. Many cultures have already experienced Western medicine, but many have not. The level of comfort that someone has with Western medicine depends upon a number of factors, including how assimilated that individual is to American culture, how long they've been here, what have their past experiences been with Western medicine and with their own traditional healing methods? Did one work better than the other? Are they more comfortable with their own healing methods that have been passed down through the generations? We have to be very careful not to automatically assume that their ways won't work. In reality, they may be just as effective, if not more so, than our own Western techniques. Whenever possible, we can try to integrate their ways with elements of modern medicine. This increases patient trust and buy-in. It creates a higher probability of having some positive outcomes from the treatment. The mind is a powerful thing for all of us, so if we believe something will work, it's more likely to. On the same note, if we don't believe something will work, it probably won't. So it is in our patient's best interest to find out what they think will help and then try to find a way to incorporate that into their care plan. Of course, the doctor or pharmacist will want to make sure there aren't any contraindications between substances, but usually it's quite fine to employ traditional healing methods and modern medicine concurrently. If they insist on only using their traditional healing methods and decline Western medicine, that's okay too, as every patient has a right to accept or refuse treatment. We can't force them. Culture can also affect a person's response to pain, both in the meaning of pain and how they are expected to show or express their pain. For many people, pain can be seen as something positive. that it's a sign the body is fighting towards recovery, or maybe as a test of one's faith through suffering, or even as punishment. If pain is something that people are expected to endure, they may need to act very stoic and strong and not show that they're in pain. Thus, asking for pain medication may be considered a sign of weakness in some cultures. In other cultures, the patient may not want to be a burden, or they may have a more indirect style of communication, so they may wait until the doctor or nurse asks them if they're in pain and then may acknowledge it. For these reasons, healthcare providers should assess pain and ask patients if they need any pain medication. But they shouldn't force it or try to coerce patients to take it, nor should you assume that patients aren't in any pain if they don't bring it up themselves. And then, if they do admit to experiencing pain, we need to recognize that not everyone will want pain medication. They may prefer to treat their pain with their own traditional healing techniques. And again, these may be just as effective, even more so than our heavy narcotics or analgesics, and they often have fewer side effects when using traditional healing methods. Our reading pointed out some interesting examples that show how pain can be perceived and expressed very differently among various cultures. For example, Cullen highlights how stoic behavior and not showing pain may be common among many Hispanics, Asians, and Native Americans. On the other side, though, patients of Mediterranean or Middle Eastern descent may be more expressive in their communication and more likely to openly express their concerns about pain. It doesn't mean that one group is tougher or weaker than another, but simply that there are different social and cultural expectations surrounding pain. And even then, sometimes it's just dependent upon the individual. Some people don't want to be a burden or bother anyone, especially if they sense their nurse or doctor is really busy, so they don't want to bother them and ask for pain medication. Other people feel they're being punished for past transgressions or sins, and so they want to carry that burden of pain alone. It's up to your patients. We can't force them to do anything, but we can be better informed and aware of what to look for and how to then offer our support. Therefore, it's important we know how to assess pain in a comprehensive, culturally sensitive manner. This will provide us better insight in understanding our patient's pain and effectively managing it as the patient desires. There are a number of different pain assessment tools. One goes back to something we've learned earlier when we looked at Kleinman's questions. We see those here. What do you think caused the pain or the illness? Why do you think your pain started when it did? What do you think your pain does to you? How severe is your pain? What are the main problems that this has caused for you? What do you fear most about it? What kind of treatment do you think you should get? You can adjust these questions, like I did even as I read them, to deal with pain specifically or their illness or condition more generally. And it's an excellent way to really find out from your patient's perspective. Another one, which I kind of clicked on early here, is really good, and it's the Wong-Baker Faces Pain Rating Scale. I'm sure many of you have seen this. This has a series of 6 gender-neutral face circles that range from depicting a neutral facial expression of no pain, no hurt, to the worst possible pain or hurt that's depicting a crying face there on the right-hand side. This tool is available in 13 different languages and has also been modified to work with others as well. We've also talked about hospice and palliative care, as well as advanced directives, in depth in this class. You should all have a good understanding at this point of what these terms mean and what all may be involved. We can see how these approaches to end-of-life care focus on comfort, harmony, family, and support, and many of these notions fit quite nicely with different cultures' beliefs and values regarding the end of life. However, not everyone is aware of hospice or palliative care services. For cultures where dying at home is seen as ideal, their values are often congruent with hospice and palliative care. Whereas we see hospice and palliative care often being a good, natural fit with many cultures, we see very different approaches to the notion of having advance directives. We've spent quite a bit of time in class learning about the different types of documents that specify our wishes at the end of life, and that's great for many of us who are part of dominant American culture. However, we also need to recognize that not everyone believes in having advance directives, or even talking about matters related to death. For this reason, we need to explore this a bit further. According to Cutural, the author of what you read for this week, research indicates that ethnic minorities have lower rates of completing advance directives. This is due to many things, including lack of knowledge and understanding by the patient and family about the advance directive. It can stem from a distrust in the American healthcare system and a concern that the person's wishes will not be carried out accurately. People may be afraid of death and not want to talk about it. And there are cultural differences regarding the need for advance directives, which relate back to what we discussed earlier, in that for many, death is a taboo subject. Other reasons may be more personal, such as people may feel guilty about losing the patient and thus prefer the physician to make the decision so they don't have it weighing heavily on their hearts for years to come. Maybe they're confused about what's involved in different documents and they're simply mistaken. For example, maybe they think that a healthcare power of attorney can take their house or their car, when that's not the case at all. Some people feel that God has control, and they shouldn't try to shorten or lengthen life beyond what God already has planned. Maybe they're afraid that this will give too much control to someone else, or that they'll be forced to do something or not do something that goes against their wishes. Maybe they have a fatalistic mentality, and whatever will be, will be. Maybe they don't even want to mention death or talk about it for fear it will bring bad luck or will be perceived wrong by the patient and family. Maybe they just don't want to mess with nature and what happens naturally in life and death. Whatever the reason, and we've just listed many, we certainly don't want to force our patients to fill out advance directives. But we also don't want to ignore it and just not bring it up. Building rapport and establishing a trusting relationship with our patients will go a long ways in allowing us to at least dialogue about how they view death in their family or in their culture, and we can then explore what they're comfortable discussing or not discussing. For many ethnically diverse cultures, the approach to health and illness is through the interconnection of mind, body, and spirit with the nature or surrounding environment. Faith and spirituality can play a significant role in the perception of and response to the dying process. We know from previous discussions already that religion and spirituality also serve as guides for members of those faith groups, in terms of explaining life and death, guiding someone along their spiritual journey into whatever afterlife may follow, and then of course it influences what specific rituals surround dying and death. We've looked at some of these aspects throughout the semester, but in this last part of lecture, I want to just point out some important things that you'll want to know about specific religions, so that if you have a patient who belongs to that faith group, you'll have an idea at least of how to start in providing cares that are more individualized and specific to them within the context of their own life. We'll explore 5 major world religions, looking specifically at some overarching beliefs about life and death, at some specific practices that may need to be done prior to death or after the death occurs, as well as some common terminology or even questions for us to consider as health professionals. That being said, we also need to recognize that people will have varying degrees of control over what the dying experience actually involves, depending upon where the person is living. If someone is at home, then the family can implement all kinds of special rituals and practices. If they're in a hospital or a nursing home, however, there are going to be policies that dictate some of what they can and cannot be doing in those settings. They may still be able to have a religious figure or spiritual healer come in, but they may not be able to do things like light candles, burn incense, or offer any type of animal sacrifice. Even things like ritual songs or dances or prayers may be considered too loud or bothersome to other patients or residents nearby, so people who are dying in a facility may really be quite limited in terms of what they can do or can have done on their behalf. This may not seem like a big deal, but considering that 80% of deaths in the U.S. occur in institutional settings, this is pretty crucial. It would be helpful for us to talk with our patients and their families to find out what they need to do or what they'd like to do, and then we can try to be flexible and creative in helping some of these rituals to take place, even if they need to be adapted or modified a bit. So now let's look at some of these characteristics for 5 major world religions. Again, there's always more that we can learn, but these are some basics to kind of provide that generalization as a starting point. As you know, there's great variation among Christian denominations or branches. Even with this diversity, however, comes some commonalities, and it's important that we point these out. For Christians, the body and soul are seen as separate, and when someone's body dies, their soul is believed to either go to heaven or to hell, depending upon their beliefs and actions during their lifetime. There may be slight variations depending upon which denomination of Christianity one adheres to. Not all Christians, but many, will like to pray and have the Bible or passages of Scripture read to them or referenced at the end of life. There are also many common rituals that revolve around life and death, including baptism, anointing of the sick, confession, and last rites. As mentioned, many people will pray or ask others to pray with them or for them, and it's common to have clergy, be that a priest, pastor, minister, and so forth, be visiting the person who is dying. There are specific rituals or things that may need to be done prior to when the person dies, as well as after they have died. These, of course, vary depending upon not just the denomination, but also the family and the individual. But here are some things to be aware of. Again, they may ask for someone from their church to visit or be consulted. They may request specific rituals to be completed. And we need to realize that what someone defines as living may be slightly different, especially when you look at circumstances involving brain death, persistent vegetative states, and so forth. After someone dies, there aren't necessarily strict rules that adhere to all Christians. Rather, you'll want to observe the family and talk with them about what they need from you and what needs to happen next. Judaism, like Christianity and any other religion, has some commonalities, but there is still room for interpretation depending upon what branch of Judaism one belongs to, as well as their own family's preferences. Most Jews believe that death is a natural event that happens when it's meant to happen. God knows when it's our time to die, and they would not encourage us to hasten or bring death about more quickly. On the right-hand side, we see some common terminology, which I hope you recognize from previous classes. We need to be aware of what these words mean and what may be required in terms of faith practice, nutrition, and rituals, but again, we need to remember that each person of the Jewish faith may have slightly different perspectives or preferences. Generally speaking, it can be good to contact the family with questions, and you may even find it helpful to consult with a local rabbi. Oftentimes, scripture passages are read aloud to the patient before they die. Be aware of the room as well. For example, if someone is in a Christian hospital, you may ask them if they'd like the crucifix taken down off the wall. After the person has died, if you're not Jewish, you really shouldn't be doing a lot with their body. The family members or members of their faith community will come and stay with the body, cleaning it and bathing it. Allow them time and privacy to do so. Ask them if they need any supplies that will help them, maybe wash basins or washcloths or towels. Typically, most Jewish people are buried within 1 to 2 days of death. Every family is different, of course, with some wanting space and privacy at first, or others being available to talk and plan right away. So kind of go with what seems to be happening for the patient, the family of the patient you're caring for. Families may also tear a piece of their clothing as a sign of their grief, or more commonly, they may wear a piece of black cloth pinned to their shirt as a sign that they are mourning. Muslims also have fundamental beliefs when it comes to life and death. Like Jews, they see death as a natural part of life and believe that it is predestined, meaning that there is a certain time they will die. They don't try to fight that or extend life beyond what happens naturally. Muslims pray 5 times a day and have a ritual washing before starting their prayers. If people are sick or dying, they're not required to fast during Ramadan, although they may still wish to. That's up to the patient. Remember, Muslims don't have a pastor or priest or rabbi. Instead, they have a prayer leader called an imam who can be a wonderful source of support and information for the healthcare providers and for the patient and family. You should know this already, but Muslims use the name Allah for God. Remember, Muslims, Christians, and Jews all have the same God, and their holy book, rather than our Bible or the Torah, is called the Quran. This book is considered holy, and we should not be placing anything on top of it. When a Muslim patient is declining and it becomes known that death is imminent, the family needs to be notified, and possibly the imam. Often they will read passages from the Quran out loud to the patient, or whisper prayers in their ear as they're taking their last breath. You can move the patient's bed to face Mecca if possible, which is to the east of us. And again, after someone dies, they're typically buried within 1 to 2 days. Some Muslims may hold their grief in and not show it externally, while others may be more outwardly expressive of their emotions. If you're not Muslim, you should wait to let the family care for the body instead of you doing it. The family will clean and wash the body. And again, remember that modesty is very important, even after death. So if at all possible, have the same gender person cleaning and preparing the body, and keep it covered as much as possible. Family will likely want to have someone stay with the body at all times. Hinduism is really more of a philosophy than a religion, and it's more spiritual in nature. Their doctrine is interpreted differently by different branches of Hinduism, just as we see with other world religions. Generally speaking, though, the body is seen as a means of connection between the soul and the life. When someone's body dies, their soul will be reborn again and again until it accomplishes its needed spiritual goals. This is referred to as reincarnation. Death is seen as a natural event, even with its own timing, not really as something to be feared. Rather, death is seen as a great journey. If you're caring for Hindu patients, do not remove their jewelry unless you absolutely have to. And this, by the way, goes for any patients who may be wearing jewelry that have religious or spiritual meanings for them. If possible, the family of a Hindu person may bring in holy water from the river Ganges and put it into their mouth. They may also request the position of the patient or the patient's bed to be adjusted. Many Hindus prefer to die on the floor, so they may ask you to put the mattress on the floor, have them face east, or possibly even have a window open for their soul to leave once the body dies. These should not be that hard of accommodations for us to make, and it will be very important to the patient and family that we try to meet their requests. For Hindus, it's important that they seek forgiveness for past debts and misdeeds. They want to make amends with loved ones, much like the term that we use, taking care of unfinished business. It's important for them to mentally prepare for death and try to stay focused as they take those last breaths if they're still conscious. Most Hindus would probably not request life support, but it may be hard to withdraw it if it was already initiated. After someone dies in the Hindu culture, the family will wash and dress the body. Many Hindus believe it's important to have the whole body intact, so they may not be likely to donate organs and they may resist autopsy. Hindus are typically cremated rather than buried, often with the ultimate wish that their ashes be spread in the river Ganges at some point in the future. Again, do not remove any jewelry or strings on the patient. Leave them intact. Buddhism is the last major world religion we'll look at today. For Buddhists, death is believed to be a doorway through which an individual passes into a different kind of existence, and whose characteristics depend upon one's attitudes toward death and dying. Death is the separation of the mind and body. Each living being has a mind or consciousness that continues to exist after the death of the body. Eventually, that consciousness will be reborn. Buddhists accept these fundamental truths. 1. That suffering is an inevitable part of life. 2. No one is immune to sadness and disappointment. And 3. Everything comes to an end, or death is inevitable. It's common to see prayer beads and imagery of Buddha to facilitate meditation and prayer, so don't be surprised if you see these things in a patient's room. If the person is still trying to eat and drink, be sure that you inquire about any dietary needs, as many Buddhists are vegetarian. As a Buddhist patient approaches death, they're mindful of exploring death itself. They will try to have peace of mind at the time they die, and as such, it's important that we try to have the environment be as calm and peaceful as possible. The healthcare provider can talk with the patient about how they feel related to their upcoming death, and we need to know that it's important for Buddhists to have a dignified death. After the person dies, try to still keep things calm and peaceful. Treat their body with respect. They may have another Buddhist prepare the body, but they don't have to, so you may be the one who carefully washes and cleans them. It's also common to see family praying at their bedside while the body is being prepared. With patients and families of different religions, or any other, not even just the ones we've talked about, or even patients who have no religious beliefs at all, it's important that we remember that each person and each family are unique. We want to have some general information to help us get started, but we're going to need to develop a trusting relationship and be able to ask the patient or family questions in order to learn more. We need to be able to explain that we're trying to provide the best care possible for them, and in order to do that, we'd like to gather some information so that we can be helpful. On the slide here, you see 4 different assessment models that we can use to provide more culturally competent care for our dying patients and their families. You've learned about the Purnell model already, as well as Kleinman's questions. Campbell had just added some pieces about religion to his work. The article that we read for this week touches upon those, but also provides some tables that help us assess specific areas for consideration. Geyer, David Zahar, and Huff's cultural assessment model looks specifically at communication, space, time, environmental control, social organization, and biological variation. And Kagawa, Singer, and Blackhall's ABCDE cultural assessment model looks at attitudes of parents and families, beliefs, context, decision-making style, and environment. Yes, I'd like for you to actually read through these assessment questions in your reading for this week, as you'll see that they're very similar to some that you've learned with the Purnell model. Some may resonate more with you than others, though, so read through them and see what feels right to you. Then, imagine yourself asking patients these questions to gather information. It's one thing for us to just read them and move right on, but to take time to really practice them and use them is that much better. Besides, I'll ask you about some of these questions on the next quiz or exam, so be sure that you're familiar with them. In conclusion, we need to remember that regardless of how busy we are or how much we think we already know, we need to slow down and spend time with our patients. We need to find out what's important to them culturally, religiously, or spiritually, and then consider how they view life and death. We have to look beyond ourselves and help understand what they need, what they want, within the context of their own lives. We need to listen offer support, and do whatever we can to help make this transition from life to death as smooth as possible, and try to help facilitate a death that meets their expectations. Of course, it's not always possible, but oftentimes it really is. We just need to make it a priority. Thanks for listening, learning, and being open to these ideas, guys. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great week, and I really do look forward to seeing what you find in your own research about diverse customs related to death and dying.